Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Digicom Cafe for another Radio on the Rocks Cafecast. Today we're serving up something a little different. It's a deep dive. But a deep dive into something pretty unique called MeshSense. Now, if you're into tech and love exploring new ways to communicate, well, you're in for a treat.
That's right. We're going to take something that can be a bit complex, managing a whole meshtastic network, and we're going to break it down and show you how MeshSense can make it not just easy, but actually fun.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but before we go any further, let's back up a sec for anyone who might be new to this whole thing. Can you give us like a super quick Meshtastic 101?
Sure. Think of it this way. It's like texting, but without needing cell service or Wi-Fi. You're creating this off-grid network where devices can talk directly to each other.
So like walkie-talkies, but with texting.
Yeah, exactly. But with much longer range. And that's what makes it so powerful.
Yeah.
Especially for emergency situations. When regular communication is down.
Right, because if there's a natural disaster or some kind of major outage, being able to connect with people could be a lifesaver.
Absolutely. And that's where MeshSense comes in. It's this free and open source tool that basically gives you X-ray vision into your Meshtastic network.
Wait, hold on. You can actually see your networks.
Yep. You can see where all your nodes are, how strong their signals are, even the path a message takes through the network. It's called a trace route.
Oh yeah, trace route. I've heard of that.
Yeah.
But before we get all techie on everyone, can you tell me what makes MeshSense so easy to use?
Well, first of all, it works on pretty much any computer you have, Windows, Linux, Mac. And connecting it to your Meshtastic node is super simple. You can do it through Bluetooth or Wi-Fi.
So no crazy setup or anything?
Nope. The folks behind MeshSense, it's the amateur radio software team over at N3FJP. They really wanted to make this accessible to everyone.
That's awesome. So are they like a big software company or something?
Not exactly. They're actually really into logging and contesting software for the amateur radio community. MeshSense kind of started as a side project for them.
So they just made this incredible tool for themselves and decided to share it with everyone.
Pretty much. It was actually a father-son project initially.
Wow, that's a cool story.
Yeah.
So they saw this need in the community and decided to step up.
Yep. And it's really taken off. People are finding it super helpful for managing their Meshtastic networks.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this is such a big deal. But what are some of the specific things that make MeshSense so useful for managing a network?
One of the key features is the node list. It shows you all the active nodes in your network.
So you can see at a glance who's online.
Exactly. And if you see a bunch of nodes offline, it could mean there's a problem with your network coverage in that area.
Ah, I see. It's like a health check for your network.
Exactly. And speaking of health, MeshSense also gives you detailed information about each node, like things like SNR, RSSI, and hops.
Okay, I'm gonna need a translation on those terms.
No problem. Think of SNR like the clarity of your connection. Higher SNR means a stronger, clearer signal.
Okay, got it.
RSSI is like the volume of your signal.
Yeah.
And hops refer to the number of times a message has to be relayed to reach its destination.
So fewer hops is better because it means the message gets there faster.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about channel selection? I know Meshtastic has different channels for different purposes.
Right. And with MeshSense, you can choose which channel you want to use.
Oh, that's cool. So I can use the long-range channel if I need to communicate over a long distance.
Exactly. Or you can use a custom channel for something specific.
This is really cool. It sounds like MeshSense gives you a lot of control over your network.
It does. It's all about making your network work the way you want it to.
So far, MeshSense sounds like a game changer for anyone using Meshtastic. But what about for someone who's just getting started?
Even for beginners, MeshSense can be really helpful. It takes a lot of the complexity out of understanding how your network works.
And don't forget, it's completely free.
Yep. No cost to download or use.
So really anyone can try it out.
And the best part, the team is constantly working on updates and improvements.
Wow. So it's user-friendly, it's free, and it's always getting better.
That's the beauty of open source.
Okay, I'm sold. But there's got to be a catch, right?
Well, there is one small thing. The team's main focus is still on their core software.
Right, the logging and contesting stuff.
Yeah, so while they're committed to supporting MeshSense, they don't have a ton of time for developing major new features.
Ah, so it might not have all the bells and whistles, but it does what it does really well.
Exactly.
I can live with that.
Yeah.
Especially considering how valuable this tool is.
And who knows, maybe as the community grows, we'll see even more development on MeshSense in the future.
Fingers crossed. All right, so we've covered the basics of MeshSense and how it can make managing a Meshtastic network so much easier. But let's get into the really cool stuff. You mentioned trace routes earlier. Can you tell us more about how those work?
Sure. Traceroute is basically a map of the path a message takes through your network.
Okay, so if I send a message to someone far away, I can see all the different nodes it hops through to get there.
Yep. It's like tracking a package online.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
And just like with package tracking, trace routes can help you identify any bottlenecks or delays in your network.
So if a message is taking forever to get somewhere, I can use a trace route to figure out where it's getting stuck.
Exactly. It's super helpful for troubleshooting.
And does MeshSense automatically do trace routes, or do I have to tell it to?
It can do both, actually. It'll automatically send traceroute requests when it detects a new node or a change in the network.
So it's like it's constantly monitoring things.
Yep. But you can also manually initiate a traceroute to any specific node if you want.
That's amazing. It's like having a GPS for your messages. Okay,
Yeah.
but let's step back for a second. Why should someone who's not a techie care about MeshSense?
That's a great question, because Meshtastic and tools like MeshSense can change the way we communicate, especially when traditional infrastructure isn't available.
Like during emergencies.
Exactly. Imagine a natural disaster hits and cell towers are down. With Meshtastic, you can still communicate with people, even without cell service or internet.
Wow, that's powerful.
It could be a lifesaver in those situations.
And it's not just for emergencies.
Right? Nope. It's also great for remote areas. Like if you're camping or hiking in a place with no cell service,
That makes sense.
you can use it to stay in touch with your group or check weather reports.
So we're talking about a technology that can enhance safety, provide peace of mind, and even just make life a little easier.
Exactly.
And MeshSense plays a key role in making this technology accessible to everyone.
It takes something that might seem complex and makes it user-friendly.
I like that. Making technology work for people.
Now, before we move on to the next part, I wanted to add something about the traceroute feature. It's actually quite smart about when it sends those requests. It won't send one if it already has recent data for that node, or if the hop count hasn't changed.
So it's not just constantly spamming the network with requests.
Nope. It only sends them when it needs to update its information.
That's good. Sounds like they really thought this through.
They did. And speaking of the developers, you know how we mentioned MeshSense was initially a side project for them? Well, it's clear that it's become much more than that.
Yeah, it seems like it's really resonating with the community.
It is. And even though the team's main focus is still on their other software, they're definitely open to feedback and suggestions for MeshSense.
That's great. It shows that they really care about making this tool as useful as possible.
They do. And they've even included a FAQ section in the app to help people out.
That's awesome. It's great to see developers who are so responsive to their users.
It really highlights the power of open source development. When everyone works together, we can create some amazing things.
Well said. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty inspired right now. We've learned so much about MeshSense and the potential of Meshtastic networks.
It's definitely an exciting area of technology.
It really feels like we're on the verge of something big.
We are. This technology has the potential to change the way we communicate.
And MeshSense is making it possible for everyone to be a part of that change.
I think that's a great place to take a break. We'll be back in a few minutes to continue our deep dive into MeshSense.
Welcome back to the Digicom Cafe. Before the break, we were talking about the bigger picture of MeshSense and Meshtastic networks.
Right. It's one thing to understand the tech stuff, but what I really find fascinating is like the potential impact this could have. Especially in those what-if scenarios we all hope never happen.
Absolutely. We talked about emergency preparedness, but let's really dig into that. Imagine like a natural disaster or a major power outage or even a cyber attack, and suddenly all the regular ways we communicate are gone.
Yeah, it's a scary thought, but unfortunately it's something that's become more and more common these days, and that's where something like MeshSense and a Meshtastic network could be a game changer.
Exactly, because you're not relying on those centralized systems that can go down so easily. You're creating your own independent network.
So it's like having a backup plan for communication, but a really, really good one. Exactly. And MeshSense makes managing that backup plan super easy. Remember how we talked about the node list? And how it shows you which nodes are active and inactive?
Right.
Well, in an emergency situation, that becomes even more crucial. You can quickly see the status of your network and identify any potential issues.
So it's all about having that situational awareness so you can make informed decisions about how to communicate.
Exactly. And that can make a huge difference in coordinating relief efforts, or checking on loved ones, or just staying connected with your community during a crisis.
That makes a lot of sense. But emergencies aside, there are other situations where having a Meshtastic network in MeshSense could be really valuable, right?
Oh, absolutely. Think about remote areas where there's no cell service or internet access, like rural communities or national parks.
Yeah, I've been in those situations before, where my phone was basically a brick. Having a Meshtastic network would have been amazing.
Right, you could stay in touch with your group, check weather reports, even just send messages back and forth without worrying about cell service.
And with MeshSense, I could actually see how far my messages were traveling.
Exactly. It's pretty cool. And it's not just for recreation either. Imagine researchers working in a remote rainforest, or aid workers responding to a crisis in a developing country. Having a reliable off-grid communication network could be essential for them.
Yeah, it's incredible how this technology can bridge communication gaps and empower people in so many different ways.
It really is. And, you know, it's not just about the technology itself, it's also about the people behind it.
Right. The N3FJP team and the whole Meshtastic community are so passionate about this.
They really are. It's inspiring to see their dedication to open source development and how that's made MeshSense so accessible to everyone.
It's amazing how their passion has led to something that's making a real difference in the world.
Absolutely. It goes back to that idea of sharing knowledge and empowering others.
Yeah, because when you make something like MeshSense free and open source, you're not just giving people access to the technology, you're inviting them to be a part of something bigger.
Exactly. It's about fostering collaboration and innovation and creating a community where everyone can contribute.
And that community aspect is really special. You see it in the Meshtastic forums and online groups.
People are sharing their experiences, offering support, helping each other troubleshoot problems.
It's really cool to see. It makes me wonder what the future holds for MeshSense.
Yeah.
I know the N3FJP team is focused on their other software, but do you think they'll continue to develop and improve MeshSense?
It's hard to say for sure, but one thing is certain. They are incredibly responsive to community feedback. They've already incorporated a lot of suggestions from users, and they're always open to new ideas.
So it's not just a one-way street.
Nope. It's a conversation between the developers and the users.
And that's what makes open source development so exciting.
You never know what brilliant ideas might come from the community.
Or what amazing new features might be added.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the power of MeshSense and Meshtastic networks. We've explored their potential in emergencies and remote areas, and we've even touched on the amazing community that's driving this technology forward. But I have to admit, I'm still a little curious about some of the technical details.
Like what?
Well, we keep mentioning trace routes, but I'm still not entirely sure how they work.
Well,
Can you walk me through the process and explain what kind of information I can get from a trace route?
sure. Imagine you want to send a message to someone on your Meshtastic network. But their node is pretty far away. Your message isn't going to travel directly to them. It needs to be relayed through other nodes in the network.
Like a chain of people passing a message along.
Exactly. And a trace route is a way to map out that chain. It shows you the exact path your message takes, hopping from one node to the next until it reaches its destination.
Okay, that makes sense, but how does it actually work? What triggers a trace route?
Well, there are a couple ways it can happen. As we mentioned earlier, MeshSense can automatically initiate a trace route whenever it detects a change in the network, like a new node coming online or a node going offline.
So it's constantly monitoring things.
Yep. But you can also manually initiate a trace route to any specific node.
So if I'm curious about how a message travels to a particular friend, I can just tell MeshSense to trace the route.
Exactly. And the information you get back from a trace route can be really helpful.
Okay, like what?
First of all, you see the list of nodes that your message passed through.
So I can see which nodes are acting as relay points.
Yep. And how many hops it takes for a message to reach its destination.
Got it. What else?
The trace route also provides information about the signal strength between each hop. This is represented by the SNR value,
SNR.
which, remember, is a measure of how clear the signal is.
Right.
So by looking at the SNR values along the trace route path, you can identify any weak links in the chain.
Interesting. So it's not just about seeing the route. It's about understanding the quality of the connection along that route.
Exactly. And this can be super helpful for troubleshooting. If you're seeing dropped messages or slow communication, you can use a trace route to figure out where the problem is.
That's amazing. It's like having a diagnostic tool for your network.
Oh.
But all this talk about signal strength and hops, it makes me think about the limitations of Meshtastic networks. These networks rely on nodes being within range of each other, right?
That's right. The range of a Meshtastic node can vary, depending on things like terrain, antenna type, and even weather conditions.
So it's not like I can send a message across the country using a Meshtastic network.
Not directly, no. But that's where the power of relaying comes in. If you have enough nodes spread out over a large area, you can effectively extend the reach of your network.
Ah, so each node acts as a booster.
Exactly. And with MeshSense, you can actually visualize that chain and see how messages are being relayed across your network.
Okay, that makes sense. But what happens if there's a gap in the chain? Like if there's a large area with no nodes present?
That's a great question. And it highlights one of the challenges of building large-scale Meshtastic networks, making sure there's enough coverage. If there's a gap in the network, messages might not be able to get through.
So it's not just about having a lot of nodes, it's about placing them strategically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where tools like MeshSense can be helpful.
How so?
Well, it doesn't have specific features for planning node placement, but the information it provides about network topology, signal strength, and message paths can be really valuable for making informed decisions.
Ah, I see. So by analyzing the data from MeshSense, I can get a better understanding of my network.
And figure out where additional nodes would be most beneficial.
That makes sense.
And as more people start using Meshtastic and tools like MeshSense, I think we're going to see even more sophisticated techniques for network planning.
That's exciting. It feels like we're just scratching the surface of what's possible.
We are. It's a really fascinating time to be involved in this space.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty inspired. I think it's time for a quick break. We'll be back in a few minutes to wrap things up. Welcome back to the Digicom Cafe. You know, we've been talking a lot about the technical aspects of MeshFence, but I think what really stands out to me is the human element. This incredible tool was created by a father and son team.
I know, it's a great story. They saw a need in the Meshtastic community, and they used their skills to create something truly special.
And the fact that they made it open source, it really speaks to their generosity and their commitment to sharing knowledge.
Absolutely. They could have easily kept this to themselves or tried to profit from it, but they chose to make it available to everyone.
And that's what makes this whole thing so inspiring.
It's about more than just the technology. It's about people coming together to help each other.
And that's the spirit of the amateur radio community.
Exactly. It's all about experimentation, innovation, and collaboration.
And MeshSense is a perfect example of that.
It's a tool that was born out of passion and a desire to make things better.
It's clear that it's having a positive impact on the community.
People are using it to manage their networks, troubleshoot problems, and even just learn more about how Meshtastic works.
It's amazing what can happen when people share their knowledge and work together.
And the N3FJT team is still actively involved. They're constantly listening to feedback and making improvements.
So even though their main focus is on their other software, they're still dedicated to making MeshSense the best it can be.
And who knows what the future holds? Maybe they'll add even more features or enhancements.
Or maybe someone in the community will come up with a brilliant idea.
That's the beauty of open source. The possibilities are endless.
And I think we've covered just about everything there is to know about MeshSense.
We've explored its features, its benefits, the team behind it, and even its potential impact on the world.
It's clear that this tool is more than just a way to manage a Meshtastic network.
It's a gateway to a whole new world of communication possibilities.
Whether you're a seasoned ham radio operator or just someone who's curious about off-grid communication, MeshSense is an incredible resource.
It makes exploring and understanding this technology easier and more enjoyable than ever before.
So if you're intrigued by what you've heard today, I encourage you to check out MeshSense for yourself.
You can find all the information you need on the N3FJP website.
And don't forget to let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your feedback and experiences with MeshSense.
And as always, thanks for joining us here at the Digicom Cafe for another Radio on the Rocks Cafecast.
We'll catch you next time for another deep dive into the fascinating world of technology